everybody. Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in. It's good to see so many people here today. That's very nice. It's lovely to see like a large audience of people just sitting, listening to our smooth bookstore jazz, waiting for the show to start. We started a little bit late today, but I appreciate all of you being here. So allow me to properly welcome everybody to Conversations with Authors. Today we bring to you Joel Selvin and his newest book, Hollywood Eden, Electric Guitars, Fast Cars, and the Myth of the California Paradise. But before we get to our authors properly, allow me to welcome all of you to our Conversations with Authors series. If you've seen one of these events before, well then welcome back. We're very glad always to have returning customers or returning viewers. But if you're new here, then Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And when we host and run book talks just like these very often throughout the week, both in person and online. And as we are streaming on YouTube, right here on this channel, and will continue to do so in the future, at least in some capacity, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video. It's the big red one. It's completely free to you and really helps us out. And additionally, if you subscribe and click the little bell next to the button, you'll be alerted every single time we go live with one of our author events just like this one. And you might catch some events that you would have missed out on that you might have really enjoyed. If you subscribe, you'll catch them. It's easy. YouTube's wonderful that way. If you'd like to check out the upcoming events and don't like the idea of doing this on whole process on YouTube, that's significantly easier. But you can also subscribe to our email newsletter that goes out weekly every Monday morning. You can find that at bookpassage.com. And again, if you'd like to check out tonight's book, which again is Hollywood Eden, or anything else that gets mentioned here tonight, you can find it all in the description below the video, just directly below the video that says see more. Or you can find it from me spamming into the YouTube chat periodically. There's a blue link at the very top of the chat that has the link to buy the book. Finally, if you have any questions for tonight's speakers, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. It's just to the right of the screen or just below the screen, depending on what mode you're viewing it in. And it's the only way to get your questions to the speakers. So please do not miss out on your chance. We don't always get to all of them, but please do write them if you have them, because our authors might really enjoy it, and you might make a really good show. So now, allow me to introduce to you Joel Selvin, who is an award-winning journalist and music critic who covered pop music for the San Francisco Chronicle for over 35 years. His writing has appeared in Rolling Stone, in the Los Angeles Times, Billboard, and Melody Maker. He has contributed liner notes to dozens of recorded albums. Selvin is also the best-selling author of over a dozen books about pop music, including Fare Thee Well, the final chapter of the Grateful Dead's Long, Strange Trip, Altamont, The Rolling Stones, The Hells Angels, and in the inside story of rock's darkest day. And Here Comes the Night, the dark story of Byrds and the dirty business of rhythm and blues. He lives in San Francisco. In conversation tonight, we have two people whom Joel is absolutely elated to have in the conversation. Their names are Jill Gibson and Judith Lovejoy, but he will be the one introducing them to you. Let me just get out of everybody's way, stop speaking and just hand the show off to Joel. Please welcome.
Thanks, Nick. It's really good to be here. This, of course, was supposed to be at the Corte Madera store in person. Hollywood Eden, my book, has been out a little while. It came out in April. And when we had a moment some time ago, it seemed like we were all going to be able to gather in public again. I stepped up and asked Book Passage, could they facilitate a in-store book signing? Because, you put out a book during a pandemic, you spend an awful lot of time on Zoom, and, meeting people that way is kind of difficult. I love the in-store book signings. You really get to face up your audience and talk to people who've read your books, and it's a great exchange and a lot of energy. And I've had signings at Book Passage in Corte Madera for every book I've done pretty much since Summer of Love in 1993. And Elaine and Bill Petrocelli, the owners, attended that first book signing, and they made me feel like an esteemed Bay Area author right then and right there. And Book Passage is not just an ordinary bookstore. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the place, but it's really more of a community center. My father took French lessons there years ago, and Nick was outlining their ambitious and extraordinarily interesting internet schedule that they've been running during the pandemic, and the email communications, but they also print an incredible monthly calendar that is just, it's like what the book section of the Chronicle should be. So I'm glad to be here for Book Passage, and I'm only sorry that we aren't sitting around a big room in Corte Madera all together. And I'm especially glad to have Jill and Judith with me today, Jill Gibson and Judith Lovejoy. In fact, and I don't know if Jill remembers this, but when I first approached Jill about cooperating with me on this project, it was 2014, and we met for coffee at Book Passage in Corte Madera. You remember? So this is like a full circle moment. Hollywood Eden is something like my 20th book. I left the Chronicle in 2009. I've written 12 books since then, and I want you to know I'm having a ball. Everyone has just been a million lessons and a postgraduate seminar, and collecting up so much information and so many people. But Hollywood Eden came to me in the wake of my Burt Burns biography, Here Comes the Night. Burt Burns was a rhythm and blues songwriter that operated in New York in the early 60s. And my book about him was really mostly an ensemble portrait of the community in which he worked. And I wanted to take that approach and apply it to Southern California's music scene and how the rock and roll developed in Los Angeles, and had tripped across the yearbook for University High School in 1958 and discovered that all these people had gone to high school together, and that really there was just a very tiny, tight little locus where all this started, and that everybody knew each other. So that became a focal point of my thinking of, like, I could take this story, and it's not that this is an untold story. There's approximately 100 books on the Beach Boys, and it's not unknown territory at all. So I wanted to approach this topic from a different type of storytelling, and that was key. So here's where Jill Gibson comes in, because all the previous accounts of this of time and this scene, it paints it as a boys' club. And indeed, the early 60s was kind of a boys' club. One of the whole things that generation of women in America had to do was establish some kind of equivalent identity in society. And I wanted to include those struggles and those stories in the foreground. I knew that Nancy Sinatra went to high school with all these guys, and that she had an atypical story, but nonetheless, it was a very parallel to all the women in her generation. It's just that she had so much more to overcome due to the fact that her father's identity so suffused her life. And that record, These Boots Are Made for Walking, was just an extraordinary personal breakthrough for her, as it was for women in general in pop music. That was the most self-assertion a female had ever been allowed in a pop song before. So all that, Nancy, I had her in the back pocket, but that wasn't really what I wanted. I wanted to get inside, and I wanted Jill Gibson. She had spent so much time with Jan Berry of Jan and Dean, and her whole struggle as to etch out her own identity just struck me from a distance as something that would be crucial to telling this story. So in 2014, Jill and I met right out in the patio outside Corte Madera, and she thought it over and allowed that she would, go along. And it took like 6 years before I finally got the whole thing rolling. It was, these books aren't all that easy, and getting everybody to agree to do it and then getting everything lined up. And there's Jill. So this is really great to have Jill. And then Judith turns up in my research. Jill sent me off to see Judith, and she turns out to be another treasure who represents herself, but is also such a perfect a product of her place and time. She just carries the story in her DNA. And so this is how I opened up this story in one way, is to like bring in these powerful, intelligent, creative, and beautiful women, and give them a large role in the story. So let's and we're lucky here to have them online with us today, so that you can meet them and get a sense of their character and their stories. You're in for a treat here. So please, may I introduce to you Jill Gibson and Judith Lovejoy. Say hello, girls. We got to unmute.
Hi everyone.
There's Jill. And now we're going to unmute Judith. Nick.
And we're gotta click the
there we go.
Hey.
Now we're all here.
Hello everyone. Hi Jill.
Hi, Judith.
Jill is coming to us from Pengrove, California, where I'm sure it's a beautiful day.
Gorgeous.
And Judith is coming to us from Los Angeles, and here we are. I'm so glad to see you guys. This is great. And Jill, it would be a really good place to start is trying to tell these people a little bit about what kind of a character Jan Berry was, because I think they know who Jan and Dean were, and Jan and Dean's kind of like a superficial, lighthearted thing. Jan Berry was anything but that, wasn't he?
Yes, he was very intense, very focused, and very driven, and very intelligent. He had a lot of charisma, and he used all of that to succeed in what he was doing, making the music and being a doctor, or not being a doctor, studying to be a doctor. Yeah, on top of everything else. So he was an amazing person.
And did school without much effort, right?
Yeah, almost no effort at all.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing.
Now, also, perhaps you can introduce them a little bit about University High. Your sister was in Jan's class, the class of 58. You were class of 60. Is that right?
Yes. She was in 58 and she was in Jan's class. Jan and Dean were both, weren't they? I think they were the same year, graduated the same year. So my sister was in their and then they had clubs, we all had clubs then, and there would be parties with the different clubs. So there was an integration between my grade, which was 2 years younger, and Jan and my sister's grade. Jan would come to parties, I would go to those parties, so there was an intermingling.
And Judith, you were a Beverly Hills girl, and one going to Marymount, which was where all the proper young girls of the West Los Angeles went in that era.
I've heard.
Tell us how you crossed paths with all these scoundrels.
At the beach.
Where else?
My family belonged to a private beach club that was about, I don't know, Jill, what was it, about a quarter of a mile down the beach? Sand and Sea Club.
Sand and Sea, yeah. My parents belonged to the Jonathan Club, which was also...
Yeah, but it's farther down the beach. But I could walk from, I'd get I'd get to the club and do whatever I was supposed to do with my parents. And then I would take off and go swimming, and I would swim down and or walk down to State Beach so I could play volleyball. And I mean, I was a volleyball addict, and it turns out so was Jill. We met at the beach. I met Jan and Dean at the beach. We all played volleyball together at the beach.
I didn't know you met Dean at the beach.
Yeah. And he introduced me, you know, and you and I were at the beach all the time, Jill.
Yeah, playing hearts and playing bridge and playing
volleyball. And Dean brought his girlfriend to the beach after we had been going out for like a month or whatever to introduce me to her, which I thought was totally weird. And do you remember her? His previous girlfriend?
No.
Did you ever? No. No, because same thing. You and I are in the same year of class, and they were. So that's it. We met at the beach, and I kept hanging out with them. And my parents said, "Well, who are these people?" You know, I wasn't allowed to hang out with people my parents didn't know. You know, that kind of thing. Very strict. And of course, Jill comes over, and you know, my father falls in love with her. My brother falls in love with her. My mother was totally jealous of her because she was so beautiful. And we had completely different childhoods, but we became friends behind this entity called music. And then we used to sing together just for fun. Phil Spector heard us once and wanted to record us. That was all very strange. I felt like a passenger in the sidecar, though, because Jill is really the one with the voice. You know, I'm just a footnote, but she has a beautiful voice. But anyway, it was at the beach, and we became immediate friends. I didn't go to anything that had to do with uni. Jill didn't go to anything that had to do with Marymount. And we were beach girls and Jan and Dean's girlfriends.
Nice, you know, good CV. I'm so fascinated by the West Side Los Angeles in 1958. You know, the Sunset Sepulveda being a four-way stop, and the whole small townness of it all. I mean, what was State Beach?
It was a field of flowers on the southeast corner of Sepulveda, and what's, you know, now the freeway.
Yeah, of course, there was no 405 at that point.
There was no Marriott. There was no anything. It was flowers. Oh boy, how different the times were.
I can only just vaguely imagine this, and the Sylvan beaches that are what, 10-minute drive from high school?
Yeah, more or less.
A little farther from me in Beverly Hills, but you know, still only less than 10 miles to the beach. Now I only live 3 miles from the beach, and I love that. But you know, the beach was, and what we did at the beach, I mean, volleyball is an Olympic sport now, you know, which that always takes me to, we used to play volleyball just as well as those girls, Jill. And we were considered sort of not bums, but ne'er-do-wells, if you will. Just playing beach volleyball all summer long. That was, you know, we should be out having jobs, or I don't know. But we just played volleyball for years. We did that. And our friendship, regardless of Jan and Dean or whatever, I mean, we've been friends for 40 years, you know, a long time.
Jill, you've described your character in those days as having been a beatnik, and I don't think you really were like a wholehearted participant in the sort of typical high school falderall that was going on at that point, were you?
No.
Tell us a little bit about
I never
that.
really liked school, so that's for one thing. And I mean, I think I don't really know what attracted me to or why I identify more as a beatnik, but I remember always wearing black. I made a bet. I guess I liked black. I don't remember exactly how this came about. And I made a bet with my friend Nancy that I could wear, or she bet me that, you know, could I wear black for the whole semester, which I did, you know, and then somehow that just carried forth. She and I used to go to Positano's, which was a coffee club on the beach in sort of toward Malibu. I don't think it was quite Malibu yet there, called, what was that called? Yeah, Positano's. And, you know, it was just up on, you just drove up this steep hill up to the cliff, at the top of the cliff. And there was this coffee house that had poetry, and you played chess and poetry readings, and it had jazz music. And that's really what I was interested in. And even later on, you know, even though I was writing music for Jan, I was still, jazz has almost always been my favorite music.
Well, jazz was the official music of the Beatnik.
Yes.
And rock and roll was something of a subspecies.
Yeah, and I mean, those early days, I mean, I would go up to San Francisco to the jazz club. I think what was it called? The jazz club, and would listen to all sorts of jazz players with my sister down in North Beach. You know, I was only 17. That was what interested me. It's always been that, and some folk music at the time. Not really rock and roll. Wasn't really that interested in rock and roll. I had a different aesthetic.
Well, but rock and roll seemed to have been a subject of intense fascination for that class of 58.
Yeah.
They entered high school in September of 1955 when James Dean had just died, and Bill Haley and the Comets' Rock Around the Clock was hitting the charts. And so Elvis was their next year in high school. And then by the time Jan is a senior in high school, he's making rock and roll records.
Yep. Yeah.
He had his first hit record while he was still in high school, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Jenny Lee.
Jenny Lee.
And that's Jan and Arnie. Who was Arnie?
Well, Arnie was in the same club as Jan, the Barons. And I forget exactly how they got together, but then he had to go to the Army, I guess. Was that it? He went to the Army.
Yes.
I know he didn't like it either. He didn't like being in that situation. I don't know if he didn't like the attention or what, but he didn't like being working with Jan, or being Arnie of Arnie and Jan. So and then I think he did go off to the military or something.
He wanted out, and Lou Adler told me that Arnie hated being in show business so much,
Yeah,
that he had a rubber stamp made of his signature so that he didn't have to sign autographs.
I never heard that one.
Judith, are you familiar with how Dean didn't get on that record?
Didn't get on which record?
Jenny Lee. Why it was Jan and Arnie and not Jan and
Because
Arnie?
it was just Jan and Arnie first.
Yeah, that was the
You know,
beginning.
there was no Dean.
No, there was a Dean, but he got drafted. Or no, he joined the
No, he joined the reserves. He never went away.
Oh, that's
But
right.
it,
What
What,
was
Jill?
Dean was first, and then Arnie took his place. Is that what happened?
there was a trio.
It
yeah,
was?
but then
And then-
I mean, I never knew Arnie. I never
Yeah,
knew
he
Arnie.
disappeared really quick. He's still around. He's an architect, and you know, he looks back on this youthful frolic with some measure of disgust and distaste.
Well, but with the reasoning of Jan and Dean and Jan and Arnie, I wasn't there for the transition. It was either Jill would tell me what was going on, or I'm over here at my sheltered life, and Jill tells me everything.
Yeah, that all happened in 1958, and then 1959, Dean comes back from the Army, and they become Jan and Dean, and Arnie's gone.
Right.
That's when I came on the scene, basically. So
Perhaps you can describe a little bit of Dean's character and how he was well suited to be partners with this overbearing, overstimulated, overdriven Jan Berry.
because Dean A wasn't driven, and B, he was a clown. He just didn't seem to take things very seriously. And he was and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, truly, but Jan was the brains and Dean was the falsetto. And that's how I always thought of them. Because I'm not saying that Dean didn't have a great falsetto, but it was Jan driven. Jan could have sang with anybody. Am I wrong, Jill?
Well, maybe not with anybody, because Gene did have the falsetto, and he was willing, and he could put up with Jan because
he didn't have an aggressive retort
in his body.
the way he was. He was just this clown person who, he said things to me. The Frank Sinatra Jr. situation.
We definitely want to have that discussion.
You bring it up when you like. But
yeah, no, definitely. But Dean wanted to be able to afford a car, and he was living at home with his parents, and they're all going to school.
And Dean was going to art school and then he went to SC to art school. He and Jill and I were all at SC at the same time, but Jill and I didn't stay.
I can't help but feel that neither of them thought that rock and roll was going to last through their lifetimes. And I also feel like their parents insisted that they go to school.
Did you know that? Or because I was always wondering that. Because I never felt that from Jan's parents, but what would I know anyway, really? I wasn't in the family. But I wasn't aware that Jan felt that this wouldn't last forever either.
But he was into school because he wanted to be a doctor.
I guess. I don't really remember. I just remember him doing both. Yeah. But why both, I don't really know. Or I don't remember.
That was Jan, I mean, he was complicated and
he was
brilliant.
Complicated. Yeah, and brilliant.
Brilliant too.
Maybe it was the prestige also of being a doctor. I don't know. Maybe it was the money for the music and prestige for the doctor. That's possible.
Well, of course, at that time, it wasn't even a sure thing that rock and roll was going to have a future. That was much in debate, and people didn't have careers. They had a hit record or two, maybe, and then just disappeared. I mean, Jan and Arnie disappeared, and then Jan and Dean had that Baby Talk record in 1959. It was a top 10 hit. That's where you come in the picture, isn't it, Joe? Baby Talk?
Well, I'm very aware of Jenny Lee, but I mean, I remember being in school and being very aware of Jenny Lee, but I don't remember exactly what record they were on when I started dating Jan.
I think it was Baby Talk with both of us, Jill.
Maybe. Well, the dates would tell you because I started dating Jan in, I think, 59, is it?
Yeah, me too, Dean, in 59, so I'm pretty sure.
So whatever record was the big record then would be the record.
Well, Baby Talk really established them. I mean, that put them on Dick Clark and all that. And then they didn't have another big hit for a long time. Not until they met Brian Wilson.
Yeah.
Do you remember Brian, Jill?
Yeah, I do remember Brian.
What was Brian like?
Well, I didn't know him that well. I would go to their house quite often, and I was more friends with Marilyn, who was his wife at the time. And so I was really more just in the house where Brian would be walking around. It's not like I was a friend of Brian's. I can't really say, but he seemed to be aloof, that's for sure.
Aloof?
I spent a little time there when I was with Terry Melcher. And he didn't removed or aloof is the word that you use, Jill. And what I want to say on top of that is that there was part of him, he was almost absent. He was somewhere else in his head. You could watch him hearing music that we weren't hearing. I mean, he had this lilt about him that and impenetrable. And he would look off like some people do when they're just staring off into space, but he was rivetingly staring off into space. I've never seen anybody with a look like that in my life. And it was like his brilliance was just right behind his eyes.
Yeah, and always fear too.
Well, that was a kind of screwed up family.
Oh yeah, but Brian just always strikes me as someone who's always got like that little sizzle of fear in his eyes,
Mm.
and yeah, aloof, absent. Yeah, definitely not fully connected. And of course,
And maybe too much too soon.
too much too soon, and then
He moved into Bel Air, in Maryland and whatever. They moved into Bel Air, and Bel Air has of course, a huge homeowners community, whatever. So Brian paints his front door. Remember this, Jill? He paints his front door either red or purple or whatever, some just screaming color of the front door.
That's
And Bel Air Homeowners Association made him repaint the door.
That's funny. That's a good one.
Oh,
Yeah,
those were
Judith, you also spent some time working with Terry Melcher and Bruce Johnston when they were turning out all those Beach Boy type records for Columbia Records, and they were hot as you could get in the record business. And Bruce Johnston, of course, had gone all the way back to University High with Jan and those guys. And Terry, you've known Terry for how long? When did you know?
Well,
Terry?
I knew Terry for his mother and my father made movies together. So, he was like, we grew up in the same hood. And I didn't get to know him well until I was in high school, but he was a person, of course, that my parents approved of because of all that crap that went on in those days. And Terry took me in my cotillions and those dances and crap that my parents made me go to. Terry would always take me. And, we had to do straight dancing. I'm not talking rock and roll had not even really arrived at this point. We were teenagers still going to high school. So anyway, I knew him for a very long time, and my father died very suddenly. And I had a job that I couldn't keep. I quit school. I just couldn't concentrate on anything. And Terry called me up, and he and Bruce were coming. He said, "Come on down here with us. Come on, you can work with us. It'll be fun. There's plenty for you to do." And I worked at Columbia for years and ended up, after Bruce and Terry, I got promoted and I worked for Irving Townsend, the head of Columbia Records in Los Angeles for years. And he saved me from Miles Davis.
Thank you. Yeah.
He was a wonderful man, Irving Townsend.
Terry Melcher, now, he was kind of a special person, wasn't he?
He was a very special person. And of course, he wasn't a record producer when he first came he came to his mother's recording session, his mother being Doris Day, being the top selling artist on the label at the time. And Terry went into the studio and watched everything, looked at everything, and he goes, "This is what I want to do." So because his mother was who she was, he taught himself basically, and with the engineers that were there and everything. And he and Bruce came up with a lot of innovative stuff. And then I think you and I have discussed, Joel, that it's anybody's guess whether Jan and Dean copied the Beach Boys or it was the other way around.
Oh no, I don't think there's anybody's guess at all. I think that it's really clear that the Beach Boys' career begins trying to sound like Jan and Dean.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the world is unaware of that.
Well, it's even more complicated than that because Jan recognized in the Beach Boys what everybody found out about them early on, and immediately started drafting Brian for material. And they pieced together that song Surf City, which Brian had a couple of extra lines and Jan caused to put it together. And then he brought Brian into the studio. Now at that point, Brian's career was two singles. Jan's career was about 15 singles, had an album out. He'd been a veteran for years. So he showed Brian not only how to stack harmony vocals in the studio, he introduced him to using session musicians on the instrumental tracks. And Brian was—
And doubling up the musicians too, for the different sound.
All of this is like coming from Jan Berry, and he's showing Brian. Brian is singing on all those records. You mentioned Dean's falsetto. it's Brian's falsetto on all those records.
Exactly.
I mean, Dean doesn't even sing on Surf City.
and not to mention Bruce's falsetto.
Well, Bruce wasn't on the Jan and Dean records, but Brian was on all of them.
Didn't they all sing together on God Only Knows or something like that?
Yeah, they did Beach Boys sessions together. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I just think the world in general does not realize that it was Jan and Dean, not the Beach Boys, that started
Absolutely.
the whole deal.
Yeah.
Well, Jan and Dean were established in Los Angeles in a way that they didn't have the same national reputation, but their records continued to play on Los Angeles radio even when they weren't having top 10 hits elsewhere. And so
Right.
their style, their sort of like, goofy approach to doo-wop was well known to people like Brian Wilson, who'd been listening to Los Angeles radio the whole time. And surfing, bomb, bomb, dip to dip is really very much just a sort of twisted version of Baby Talk.
Yeah, I'd say the bumps and the dips are all Jan.
The bombs and
That's
let's
true.
talk about the Frank Sinatra Jr. kidnapping.
Okay, if we must.
Jill, tell us about how that played from your viewpoint. I mean, you knew Barry Keenan from University High, didn't you?
Well, actually not. I got to know Barry because he was living in an apartment down below my apartment, and he was I knew him already, but I didn't know him well. But then we got to be better friends there, and he was married to a girl named, what was her name? Can't remember her name now. And then we became friends, and then I moved, and they divorced, or they split up anyway. So I got an apartment with his wife. Why can't I remember her name? Donna was her name. And so Donna and I had an apartment. And then the next thing I knew, Donna had a sister back east who was underage and got pregnant and needed a place to leave home. So she came out to live with us. Now, then one day I got a knock on the door from the FBI. I think it was the FBI, or it must have been the FBI, or maybe, it must have been the FBI. And they wanted to know about Donna's sister, whose name I do not remember. And apparently that's when I found out she was writing a script for this kidnapping. And they found this out and were looking for her. I guess I must have known about this slightly before, but I just remember that incident was really strong in my mind. Because
you
also
know about the kidnapping before it happened, Jill.
Yeah. Well, that's what I don't remember. I don't remember if they came after the kidnapping and were looking for her, or if it was before.
I think it was
But I do remember also being at my apartment and Joe Amsler calling me out of the blue because I hadn't talked to him in some years, like maybe a couple years or so. Called me up to tell me that he had this money that he was playing Monopoly with Barry.
Jesus.
Completely bizarre.
Well,
They called me. I don't know. And I don't remember I don't know what came first, the FBI and Donna's sister or that phone call. I just remember those two incidences and that's kind of what I remember. And then I saw Joe after he was arrested. I went to jail because Joe and I had dated for a year. We were going out for a year or more before I started dating Jan. And so when he was arrested, I wanted to go see him in jail. He was still in the LA County jail. So I went down to visit him. And the one thing I remember him saying to me was, nobody will ever know the truth of this, what really happened, whatever that meant. And of course I didn't ask. And that was what I remember from that encounter. And that was the last it's not the last time I saw Joe. I saw him once he got out of prison and he was going with Ann Marshall. He was Ann Marshall's boyfriend. It was also.
And I went out with him for a couple of months after that. I mean, we've all.
Really? All gone through. Oh God.
I've got this picture of of Dean and Joe sitting on the beach at State Beach. sitting in my house. It's just hilarious. I should have put, I'm sorry I didn't think about it to put it in the book, because there's Dean with his kidnapper friend.
Oh, yeah.
And Dean, obviously, he didn't tell me everything he knew, but he knew because he was kind of in on it, because he had loaned, never had the details. He'd loaned Barry a bunch of money, and they were in money stuff together somehow. Dean.
And Barry had told him what he was doing too.
Yeah. And so, I know, Dean was absolutely aware. So he made some really obtuse, oblique comment about us having a basement. Remember the basement in my parents' house?
Mhm.
And I thought, what an out of the left field question that is. And I said, what's that got to do with anything? He said, oh, nothing, being clown Dean that he was. And then however many weeks later, I read in the newspaper that Frank Sinatra Jr. has been kidnapping. I knew exactly what he was talking about with the basement. And I knew what they printed in the paper. I knew he was lying. So I was really nervous because I felt like an accessory.
Because he wanted to hide the money in your basement. Did he tell you that?
No, he did not. I said it was very oblique and very Dean, very old.
He was fishing for information.
He was, yes, exactly. So, and my mother was freaked out. And then Dean recanted, did he not? And that got in the paper too, saying that he promised his father he would never tell a lie. So he recanted his statement. And I am pretty sure, I know it's a long time ago, but I am pretty sure that that was so upsetting to me that I broke up with him. I'm pretty sure that's when that happened. But that's what happened. And as you said, Joe, if that had happened today, those people would still be in jail and I would still be an accessory.
I think Dean would be in jail.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I'm not sure how he got out from under. There was a joint safe deposit box with Barry. Yep. There was massive amounts of foreknowledge. He seems to have financed aspects of it, not just once, but twice.
But
and
I really think that was, everything points to it being a setup that was all planned with Frank Sinatra Jr. knowing, because how do you get out of prison after 4 years or whatever it was?
Mental, supposedly.
What?
Supposedly mental. Come on.
Mental? What?
Mental.
You mean they weren't all in their right minds? That's how they got out of it?
I only know that I read in the news.
Yeah, he won an appeal.
Yeah.
An appeal based on what? He kidnapped
mental incapacitation.
And also inadequate legal representation. In fact, his lawyers put that theory up in court that Frank Sinatra Jr. had set this up.
Yeah.
And they were disbarred later because of that defense.
Oh, wow.
And poor Frank Sinatra Jr., you got to feel sorry for the guy just with the name. But he, for the rest of his life, he couldn't get out from under this suspicion that he had staged this kidnapping, which we must say, it is one of the most mishaps of all-time crime history. It was these guys were idiots. And
Joel, may I say, if Frank Sinatra were going to stage his own kidnapping, the last people he would ask to help him would be Barry Keenan and Joe Amsler. Come on.
Good point.
They
had to rob him to pay for gas after they kidnapped him.
Oh, it's just a joke. And then Barry wrote a thing in prison. And who does he hand it to after to go sell it when he comes out of prison? But Dean. It's, it almost gets to be pathetically funny.
Oh, it's the gang.
I never thought that Frank Sinatra Jr. was in on it, Jill. I never did.
I don't know. It just seemed really strange that they would get out of prison. So I didn't know about these appeals and so forth. I just know, just sounded odd that they would get out so early.
Did they get out fast? I think it was 6 years.
4.
4 years?
4, I think. Well, it was very short.
It was really quick. And Keenan has made a lot of overtures to getting his story told, and it keeps changing over the years. But what an event! The kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. and the whole delivery of of him getting loose, and having the security guard find him and sneaking. I mean, it's just insane.
It's like a bad sitcom.
Yeah, it is. It is. Teresa out there in the audience was asking what you guys thought of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
I didn't see it. I wanted to see it, but I never did.
Well, having, been around when all of that really happened, it was sort of it was in his mind. It wasn't an accurate, portrayal of what exactly went down. But I don't know. Quentin Tarantino makes interesting movies. I didn't love it.
Didn't it? My sense of the movie was that it did really feel like being there. It did really feel like 1969 in Hollywood, and it looked
on
like
Brad Pitt's shirt.
On the cars and the
cars, the shirt, the clothes,
and
everything.
The atmosphere and the way people talk to each other. And I was in Hollywood in 1969. I remember it. It was a unique time and place.
You're right. Yes, it was indeed. And
we
it was
on
a
LSD by then.
Pardon?
We were all on LSD by then.
Might have been done. But point being, I remember the time so well, and I will say of Quentin Tarantino, my objections were story, nothing about the film. Was beautiful. It was produced beautifully. The art direction was brilliant. The clothing was perfect. And you did feel like you were there. I absolutely agree with that. But coming from the movie business, I'm a horrible critic, so you don't want to hear the things I say.
And Adam from our audience wanted to note that John Stamos has a podcast going, right, about Barry Keenan and the Frank Sinatra Jr.
That is correct.
I haven't heard it, but I watched a little bit of the crappy movie they made in like 1993 called Sinatra.
I don't think I'm going to waste my time watching any.
No, life's too short.
And that story is way too long.
Jill, you and Jan broke up just a couple of months before he had that terrible car crash and sustained all the brain damage. And that drew you immediately back into his orbit. One of the most tragic scenes in the book are the days that you spent at the hospital. Could you describe that a little for us?
Yeah, it was pretty rough. Well, I went to the hospital right away. His mom called me, and Sonny was there, was Dean's girlfriend, and I picked up smoking again. That was the first thing that happened. And then Jan was unconscious for weeks, maybe 3 weeks, felt like a month, but maybe it was, I don't know, something like that. And, nothing much was happening. I was just a wreck and went to the hospital every day. And finally he woke up from this coma that he was in. And that's when they put him in another room. And I remember him being in a bed that had bars up the side, gates like children so they don't fall out. And I went in to see him, and he was like a lion in a cage. He was growling and clawing like that, like he didn't have words. He was, an animal. And I remember being so shocked. So he had lost everything, all his civilized being, I guess, his speech, his movements, everything, his mind was gone. And then gradually, of course, with rehabilitation, he started coming back little by little. And that's when Lou would come to the hospital and bring him Laurel and Hardy movies because that was Jan's favorite comedian act. And that was Dean too. They both loved that. In fact, they acted it out a lot in real life. You know, we'd go to a restaurant and they'd act like Laurel and Hardy together. And so Lou showed these movies all the time. This was like, 2-3 times a week. And slowly Jan started to learn to speak again, but very slowly, and move around. I don't remember him walking yet or anything, but things started coming back. And meanwhile, I was becoming friends with Elmer Valentine at that time. He was coming to the hospital a lot. He and Lou were very close friends. Actually, I knew Elmer before that, but because I remember once I had Elmer take me to Jan and Dean's performance at the Hollywood Bowl, because I had recently been in the car with Jan. He had a Stingray, and he raced through a red light that was coming on, and we nearly got killed. And I was so freaked out by that I wouldn't drive with him to this concert. So I had Elmer drive. So obviously I knew Elmer before, I guess. So I don't remember exactly, the timelines, but so I became friends with Elmer too at that time. And then anyway, so Jan finally, I started seeing less of him. I had a kind of a run-in with his family who wanted me to, take care of Jan in some ways I just didn't want to do, and wasn't really there for that. I just wanted to make sure Jan was okay. And I mean, emotionally here, I'd been with him for 5 years. I was as brought back into that fold after that. It was only a couple of months after I left him that, he had this accident. Even though I was seeing somebody else, that ended, and I was just back into the, Jan's world. And anyway, so I wanted out of that, and I got out. And not like I didn't see him again, but I stopped going to the hospital.
And very shortly thereafter, like within a couple of weeks, you joined the Mamas and Papas.
I don't think it was a couple of weeks, was it?
Pretty close.
Really?
Wasn't more than a month.
Well, I mean, I wasn't even seeing Lou yet. And I was seeing Lou when I joined the Mamas and Papas. In fact, I had been seeing Lou for a couple of months. And then I broke up with him because, he was married and that was not feeling right. And so I left him. And then it took another month for him to just leave Shelley. And then we started dating again. And that's when the Mamas and Papas thing. So that had to be at least 3 months, 2 or 3 months.
It was the summer of '66.
Well, Jen had his accident in April, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I got into the Mamas and Papas in June or something, end of June. So it was okay, a couple months anyway. Yeah, that's when that happened.
Well, tell us about that. That was a pretty exciting little episode. I mean, London, Royal Albert Hall, the Beatles and all that.
Yeah, it was. Off we went to rehearse for the concerts that were coming up. And so we went to England for 3 weeks. And mostly we were working, a couple nights we went out to a club. And there was one night when people came to our place. And then I met George, what's his name? I'm forgetting their names now, the Beatles. George Harrison. I went to his house one afternoon with everybody. We spent the afternoon at his house, which was a huge, amazing mansion, a Tudor mansion. And he was with Patty, what's her name, then. And that was fun. And I don't remember too much about the nightlife, but there was a couple incidences that stick in my mind. Like one night, Paul McCartney came to our apartment, and we had a harpsichord, a slightly out of tune harpsichord. And so it was nighttime, it was dark, there was no lights in that room, I remember. And Paul started playing the harpsichord, and I think I was stoned and he was probably stoned. And I was looking out the window while he was playing, and there was this cat that was wandering around and meandered to the bottom of the window where there was a doormat right in front of the door to our apartment. And the cat just curled up and sat down right at the end of Paul's little impromptu playing the harpsichord. He was just making something up. It was amazing. It was an amazing moment. You know, you can't really talk about it. You had to be there. You had to hear it. But it was, for me, it was one of those unforgettable moments. Yeah, and then a lot of rehearsing, and then we came back and did some concerts, and then it was over. I think we did 5 concerts, and you know, the whole time I was feeling the stress of, you know, the emotional stress that was going on within the group with John primarily, and then because of that within the group, and then the group was, you know, the group had broken up, so you know, everybody they were a group, you know, 4 people who were bonded in many ways, and then they weren't, so that was always uncomfortable for everybody, and I felt it.
Well, just to make it clear, how you ended up is that John fired his wife, Michelle,
Yeah.
from the group and pressed you into duty to replace her.
Mm-hmm.
Nice job. I mean, you know.
And convinced me that even if she came back into to his life, she would never come back into the group, because I made that a condition that I wouldn't join if I didn't want to get in the middle of a you know, a problem between the 2 of them. No, he separated me and saying, no, that would not happen, that I would be in the group no matter what, that she was not coming back. And of course I believed it. I mean, you know, I believed it. So
There you are. And to this day, nobody knows whose vocals those are on the second album, do they?
well, I do.
You're all over those tracks, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they claim that they redid it. I don't know how that's possible when it all came out. I mean, the album was out. I mean, people, I just saw something the other day that claimed that the album never did come out. Well, I saw the album with the cover that I was on while I walked by a store. It was in the window for sale.
Oh, really?
Album that I was on, my picture there was in the store of a window. I was in the window of a store for sale.
I've certainly seen the cover. It's widely out there on the internet.
I always kind of regret that not having gone in and bought it, but you know, I didn't, you know, it didn't make sense to do that at the time. So I
No,
didn't.
there'll be plenty of those.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, it's claimed that they just sent it out to disc jockeys. It was not out for the public, but I saw it in the store. So
Amazing story. Amazing. I want to take this opportunity to thank both of you, Jill and Judith, publicly for making Hollywood Eden the book that you did. It wouldn't have been the same book without you guys. And it's so much, you inform so much of what it was like to be there. And so I'm terribly grateful for all your candor and cooperation and enthusiasm in backing this. And it's just great to be here today with you on the internet and our little, you know, internet book signing.
No, this is great.
well, I want to thank you, Joel, for writing the book, because it really made a nice synopsis for my past, the world that I lived in, and it really filled it out for me, because there was a lot in there in your book that I didn't even know. So it really kind of encapsulated the whole world I was in so that I could see it. It's been great.
Thank you. I know Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead read my book about Altamont and called me up and he said, now I know what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes someone like you to put it all together.
50 years later. All right, Nick, this has been great. And, you know, make sure you tell Elaine and Bill that you know, I pimped them up good at the beginning of this.
Hey, I absolutely will. Thank you all for coming out. That was actually, those are, well, I would say that was not a wild story. Those were many wild stories, and I'm glad that all of us were here to share them. Thank you to all 3 of you for coming out tonight one last time, not just from me, but from all of Book Passage. And I'm certain Elaine would say thank you for coming as well. But lastly, thank you to all of you that are still here in the audience and to everybody else watching this after the fact. Th- I don't know. Thank you for watching us, because although we do feel here at Book Passage like we do our part to bring to you wonderful books, wonderful authors, and to host wonderful conversations, we cannot forget all that you out there, regardless of where you are in the world, do in supporting books, in supporting authors, and supporting conversations in bookstores, particularly the independent ones like us. So thank you one last time for coming out. The book is Hollywood Eden. You can find it from Book Passage or any independent bookstore in your area. We're happy to support any of the all of them out there in the world. We can ship it to your house just like any online retailer, and almost every bookstore out there can do that as well. So if you go through and you buy it from us or any of the other stores, you'll be supporting us or your local community, and we will greatly, greatly appreciate you for doing so. One last time, thanks to our 3 speakers today. Thank you to all of you for coming out. I do hope to see you all in the next one.
Thank you, Nick.
Bye.
Bye.